let's talk a little bit about the luxury of being carefree. When we think about narcissism, we often hear the term careless because of the insensitivity of narcissistic relationships and people. The way they use impulsive throwaway language, the things that are done and said by the narcissistic person without thinking. It's careless, right? This is something different. I was thinking about something else recently, about people it's not fair for me to sit here and say they don't have a care in the world. I mean, they have sort of all the regular cares. Maybe these are people, though, maybe there's people out there who have enough money to pay the bills, who may not in their lifetime have experienced significant sort of capital T trauma, such as an assault or their house burned down or they were victims of a crime. These are people who feel safe in the world, whose lives are relatively predictable, who might have come from safe families of origin where their parental marriage was healthy and sound and there was no childhood trauma or adversity, where they feel seen or felt seen as in childhood, and the family system may still be close-knit. And if there were losses or illness in the family, at those times the family would just draw close. These are people who feel safe, who believe the world is a relatively safe place, and have a pretty well-developed sense of self. There's a lightness about folks like this who maybe even very lovely people, but there's a lightness, and I mean like lightness, right, versus a heaviness. Obviously, as life goes on, no matter how charmed or safe or healthy your life is, with time served in our lives, more things happen. As we get older, people get sick, people die, but they experience it as sort of the regular order of things and not tragedies that are thrown in life too early. Now, this term carefree is often applied to younger people. They're a teenager or a college student. They're carefree. They're not thinking about mortgages or bills or career responsibilities. Or a younger person who may opt to go backpacking or travel the world. We may think of them as carefree. But I think that this idea, this larger concept of carefree, is not just about youth. This term really is about psychological safety. Because even if a survivor of a narcissistic family system had money and a place to live, they're never carefree. I know, I've worked with folks like this. They don't feel carefree. Even if they get to go on a backpacking trip around Europe or just have fun with friends, they're not carefree. That's something that a narcissistic relationship steals from people. That sort of sense of lightness, of being carefree, even when they're very young. Again, this term carefree is somewhat misleading. Obviously, nobody is truly carefree. Everyone has some worries, even if it's just an algebra exam. But you know what I'm getting at with this term. When I meet these so-called carefree people, they're lighter. They feel lighter. They're often a bit more optimistic. They're confident that things are going to get done, that things are going to work out. They tend not to be overly apologetic. That's not to say at all that they're entitled, but they're comfortable with taking up their space in the world. They don't apologize for sneezing or for being sad or needing to talk to you or for needing a glass of water. They can be fun because there's just a lot less neurosis. And listen, not all seemingly carefree people have had an easy run. When I stopped to think of one of the most carefree people I have ever known, and really was carefree, I came to find out that, she had had significant stuff going on in her life, various people in her life and various relationships. Carefreeness was this person's temperament. But for most people who experience narcissistic relationships, that sort of light, carefree quality almost never happens. I'm going to put myself there. When I think of myself, I sort of shudder when I think about throughout my life how heavy I have come off at events that were supposed to kind of be light and chill, like weddings or baby showers, or at a social gathering in a bar or a restaurant. I'd have these heavy opinions or observations or things to say, as though people doing something, just toasting a happy couple or tittering over baby booties, was some sort of affront to me. But something that I learned in my process of healing was when I was in spaces and places where I was seeing people where life sort of worked, where families were close-knit, and the parents or couples were kind to each other, and their relationships were healthy. That filled me with shame. And I know this to be a process that happens for many survivors. And that sense of shame would overwhelm me. And it was almost like I wanted to infuse my heaviness into the situation. Like, don't you see, it's not always like this, right? I've done a lot of work on this. And it all feels easier now. And I'm always with tears in my eyes toasting the happy couple. But carefree, never. The heaviness of survivorship means that people who have survived narcissistically abusive family systems often feel like they're damaged, that they don't fit in with the rest of the world, that they have a problem, that they're weird, may even feel overly cynical, may even express that cynicism, and may find, as I said, some social groups unsettling, like visiting a happy family. There's a sense of never quite fitting in. And since we know that in order for us to heal, that requires other people in our world, finding those communities who see us and get us can feel challenging. For many survivors of narcissistic family systems, from an early age, there are unreasonable expectations. For example, the child is expected to, in some ways, parent the parents, make the household run, appease or soothe the parent when they're having a bad day, for taking care of siblings, and for always being vigilant so the system would keep running, of having to prepare yourself just to go on a family dinner or family outing, or even just going home and not knowing if it was going to be chaos or kind of normal. And all of that vigilance and fear and not having safe spaces to talk about it means that you don't feel carefree ever, but instead you feel like you're weighed down with cares from a very early age, developmentally inappropriately so, and you carry those burdens into adulthood and for a lifetime. Also, when you come from a narcissistic family system, oftentimes you are still stuck in the role of always having to keep a vigilant eye on things, serving as a caregiver for aging parents, managing never-ending family conflicts, and being locked in the toxic vortex of the family group chat. All of you people with a fixer, let me say it again. All of you who were fixers as kids, carefree was a faraway fantasy place. All that fixing you did as a kid becomes heavier for you as an adult. Or if your family of origin doesn't run well and that's always on your mind, the challenging part of duty and obligation and guilt and empathy is that you may find yourself taking responsibility for a fractured family system for a long time. The narcissistic parent was never going to help the other parent if they got sick. If the narcissistic parent gets sick, the other parent may be too frail or old or really embittered to take care of them. And the triangulation and the messiness of the family system can mean that family members do not come together cooperatively in a crisis, but rather everyone is sort of playing a game of hot potato. Who can we foist the responsibility on instead of having to take it on ourselves? A narcissistic sibling, for example, may already be eyeing the family jewels, but have no interest in participating in the caregiving of these family members. And so you may, throughout adulthood, and certainly as you get older, be trying to manage the impossible situation of an aging, manipulative family mess. If your parents start getting older or even if they're developing health issues when they're younger, you may lose a lot of adulthood to this, even your young adulthood. So much for being carefree. A narcissistic parent really does believe that their child owes them. Everyone deserves one time in their lives when they're truly carefree. And this is not just about narcissistic abuse, but of other things that can contribute to a sense of never getting this lightness. It could be financial stresses or poverty, trauma, tragedies that could befall a family, such as natural disasters or illnesses or accidents. It can mean a child has to carry burdens that they are not ready to carry and take on responsibilities that they should not have to shoulder. I have to say, in some ways, this is a bit of a stream of consciousness video because I was thinking about this sort of privilege of being carefree, and it is a privilege in many ways. And while stuff like having enough resources, money, whatever, and other social privileges, just having power in the world, can create this carefreeness, when you go through stuff, such as the chaos and unreasonable expectations of a narcissistic family system. Cares are on your shoulders before you even know what they are, and that heaviness can keep you from growing into your identity and sense of self, your aspirations, your hopes, and above all else, your authenticity. Being carefree well into adulthood tends not to be a thing. Probably somewhere around the early 30s, any form of carefreeness lifts for most people, though there are some folks who make choices in life, never having children, keeping their lives really trim. Perhaps they either don't need to deal with a family of origin or they just aren't an issue for them. And so some people can seemingly stay relatively carefree into adulthood, but still not the norm. But even having a period of it during your life means a person got to be themselves instead of having to be vigilant to the demands of a mess that they did not create. And maybe many people, especially survivors of these relationships, never get it. But it also becomes important that we don't pathologize ourselves and consider ourselves as walking human dark clouds or just heavy because you as a survivor of narcissistic abuse aren't light and carefree. For many folks, that just doesn't get to be the story, but you may find as healing happens that you might find for an entire afternoon you did laugh and stay present and stay in the moment and didn't think about all the dark clouds on the horizon at home or waiting with your family of origin. And so maybe it's not carefree days, weeks, and months and years, but rather carefree minutes and hours. And we can knit those into something that feels a lot more balanced, healthy, and for a moment, light and airy. Thanks again.